Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're doing part 164 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people will be making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got quite an interesting assortment. We've got a beetle, we've got a couple frogs, we've got a few extinct mammals, which I know we'll all not love. And we've got a bird too, so it's quite interesting variety today. So we're going to be starting off with a little bug done by Scott. All the exhibit animals in here are done by Scott, so I don't have to go through everyone. But yeah, all done by Scott. We've got the Congo rose Chafer. So let's have a look at one of these little guys hanging out. See if we find a good colour or a good position. There we are. That one's perfect. Look at how cute you are. So this is called Pachinoda Margarita pernigata. It's the Congo rose chafer, so it's a subspecies. So this is a species that comes from the Congo, Guinea, Senegal, Angola, Cameroon, Kenya, Sudan, and Cameroon. So those kind of African countries. So these guys are a diurnal animal, so they're found during the day, and extremely agile, which is perfect, which is a really cool animal. And they're often kept as pets, so they're perfect for beginner pets. In Africa, they spend most of their time living in trees or shrubs and eating fruit, petals, and tree sap. And they also have the urge to climb, so they will climb if you, as a keeper, will give them opportunities to. They're also, flying skills are very special and can make observers smile. And they can turn actually several times around on its own axis, drum with its front legs, and hums with a loud roar on the ground, which is very interesting. On the ground, they search the surface for all sorts of usable foods. Therefore, it's always something for keepers, if you're keeping them, to observe, and one discovers new behavior patterns again and again. And the outer appearance has no metallic effect as along with other rose beetles, and it's pretty inconspicuous. You can see it's pretty interesting colour to them there. The belly side under them, you can see it's just like a dark brown. So you can see it's brown and black. And the entire upper side, you can see this matte velvet colour, almost like a red velvet cake, my favourite type of cake. And then you have these like yellow kind of signals along them as well. It's very interesting. In terms of breeding, they're the most common species of rose chafer that's in captivity, and it owes this because of its very rapid reproductive rate. So the larvae grow to about 5 centimeters long and about 1 centimeter thick, and are excellent for feeding for reptiles if you have them in captivity. They provide high protein, things like that, so in the wild they would be eaten a lot by those animals. And also for fishing baits, things like that. How they succeed. So first, the sex differences, they can actually be told quite easily by their sexes. So the males has a visible longitudinal furrow, which is very obvious in the males, and the female lacks them. So you can kind of see them apart. It's probably not going to show it in this, but you can kind of notice the difference in between them. So after mating, they will actually typically make an egg pack with about 180 or so eggs in the soil substrate. And about after 3 to 4 weeks, these 3 millimeter long larvae will hatch and go through 2 molts in the substrate. They will eat white rotten wood or things just rotting wood, and they develop very fast for a beetle. And at an optimum temperature and a good food supply, they should go from egg to beetle in about 5 months, so not very long. In approximately 3 months, the larvae pupates into a self-made cocoon in the soil of secretions, and then the chafer will hatch at about 5 to 8 weeks and leave its cocoon a few days later. As soon as its chitin shell completely hardens, it digs itself into the ground. So in terms of its food, you kind of always supplement with food. They like to nibble on foliage, and you should offer them fruits if you're keeping them in captivity, except for citrus fruits. They have high sugar content, quite yummy. They like high sugar things. But yeah, really, really cool animal. Another great mod by Scott. I do love talking about these little guys. So that is the Congo rose chafer. Next up, we're going to have a look at a couple frogs. So this one here is the Linder's tree frogs. Let's see if we can get one at a good light. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to have a look at these other cameras. Let's see if you can find one. Oh, perfect. He's in a good light already. Look at how cute he is. So this is the Linder's tree frog, or Hyena lindei. So these guys are a species of frog from the family Hyena that are found in Colombia and Ecuador between 2,000 and 2,500 meters above sea level. And their typical habitat are natural habitats, things like subtropical or tropical moist montane forests, rivers, pasture rural gardens, and heavily degraded former forests, and are threatened by habitat loss. So they are threatened by habitat loss, but are still considered least concern, so quite a common species still, which is good. So typically, adult male frog will measure between 61.1 to 64.5 millimeters in snout to vent length. So that's basically the tip of their nose to their cloaca. And the adult female is about 64.8, so a little bit bigger. Their skin on the dorsum is metallic in appearance. You see someone's got that shine metal to it. And the skin on the ventrum and legs is black in colour. But you can also see the climbing disc, so the little disc you can see on their toes there that allows them to climb and stick to walls and glass like that are actually bright orange, so they look like they've got like painted toenails, which is quite cool. And the iris you can see is blue-grey with black reticulations, and they are nocturnal, so they typically only come out at night. And the reason they've got the name the Linder's tree frog, the common name refers to the scientist Linder, who probably has presumably studied a lot of these frogs. There's actually not a wiki page on it, which is a little bit sad, but let's see if we can find a little bit more information in here. Yeah, more research is required on the species, so yeah, that's pretty much the only information really we've got. Let's see if we can find a little bit more information about the rose chafer on here as well. Zoopedia. Yeah, of course, sun beetle, 9 different subspecies. Yeah, that's kind of what we mentioned there. There's different subspecies. And sometimes they make a loud snore-like noise, making their cocoons. Yeah, pretty much covered that. Anyway, so our last mod by Scott, we have got the Pinewoods tree frog. So different species. Same family, though. So this is Diophytes femoralis. So let's have a look at the exhibit camera. So you can find one in the light. Look at you! You're perfect in the light. How cute are you? This actually don't have anything in the enclosure. Oh no, it does. I was just making sure. Alright, anyway, let's carry on. Bit of a cluster today. So this is the Pinewoods tree frog, or Dinophytes femoralis. These are a species of frog in the family Hyenidae, and they're only found in the southeastern United States. So you Americans might know of this one. So as tadpoles, they lay their eggs in ephemeral like water bodies, and the eggs actually generally hatch within 24 hours, and the tadpoles metamorphosize into baby froglets at about 50 to 75 days, at about 11 to 15 millimeters in length. And they're actually remarkably variable, and similar to those of the school tree frog. The presence of dragon or absence of dragonfly larvae will induces like a dramatic red-colored tail. And like many amphibian species, tadpoles, these guys are quite susceptible to parasitic invasion by the trematode flatworms. However, they actually swim in a manner that does not necessarily reduce the intensity of infection, but reduces the likelihood of infecting the head and body region. Instead, these swimming behaviors like shut parasites to the tail area where they can kind of infect them but be more harmless. In terms of the adult body, though, they are quite small. They grow between 25 to 38 millimeters, or just under an inch to 1.5 inches, so not huge. The colours will vary, but sometimes being a mottled brownish grey, deep reddish brown, grey to greyish green, usually with these kind of dark markings on their body. And sexual dimorphism is present, with females typically being slightly larger than males. You can also see their body is quite slender, and their legs are long and the heel extends to the level of the eye, so they've got quite long legs. They're very similar in appearance to the squirrel tree frog, but can be distinguished by the series of yellow, orange, and white dots that can be seen on the back of the hind legs and things like that. So it's another way to tell them apart. And the toes are large, but with little webbing. And they have a distinct call that can be heard between April and October, and has a sequence of staccato calls, giving them the nickname the Morse code frog, so they sound like they're singing in Morse code. And they actually are unique in that the advertisement signals of individuals are highly plastic, so no two individual frogs will have the same call, so that's quite cool. In terms of their distribution and habitat, the Pinewoods tree frog is found in the southeastern United States, or the plains of the Atlantic and Gulf Coast, ranging from Virginia to Louisiana, into well as the South Peninsula, Florida, to Fort Lauderdale, but not quite into the Everglades. Distinct populations can be found in central Alabama and east central Mississippi. where they climb in high trees, but also sometimes they can tend to the ground and favour pine woodlands, savannas, mixed pine and turkey oak woodlands, and also cypress swamps they do like to. During droughts or cold weather, though, they like to hide under rotten logs or in moist crevices and trees. In terms of their biology, though, the pine wood tree mostly eats insects, and breeding will take place any time between March and October. The male will call, especially at dusk, from locations close to water, such as trees, bushes, or inside clumps of vegetation. The female lays 800 to 2,000 eggs in the clusters of 100 eggs, no more than 2 to 3 centimeters, or just under an inch to just over an inch below the water, which may be in a ditch or a temporary pool. They are fully developed and ready to go through metamorphosis at about 2 months old. There's evidence to suggest that they can actually produce a second clutch in the same reproductive season, allowing for 2 sets of eggs, so if the conditions are right, they can make more eggs. Their tadpoles, as we mentioned, they exhibit predator-induced phenotypic plasticity, so they'll have shorter bodies. When they're exposed to predators, they'll develop deeper and shorter bodies and tails, smaller overall body size, and increased orange fin coloration and black tail outline. However, low resources may inhibit their development and induce morphology that is energetically costly. And the species also has a distinct call characterized by long trains of pulses, very much like Morse code. And in terms of their status, they are likely considered least concerned with the IUCN, with a large population that is believed to be stable and still quite common over their range. And although they are listed as least concerned, protecting their habitat and respecting the habitat is still considered a priority. This idea is relevant because research suggests that this species is more sensitive to environmental and habitat changes compared to other species of tree frog. Therefore, environmental changes significantly affect the ability for this species to remain successful. So they're kind of like the canary in the coal mine. So if something's wrong in their habitats, this will be this first species to decline. So you'll know there's something wrong. So they're very important indicator species in their ecosystems. But yeah, really cool. So a really nice one. I think they've all done a wonderful job. So another one done by Scott. I love Scott's like mods. He makes so many awesome mods, and I love being able to talk about a lot of these little species and disperse. And it allows me to make these videos a little bit quicker. Anyway, but yeah, let's carry on. Next up, we have got the Asian Openbill. So this is a really cool one. This is actually a bird I hadn't heard before this, so a really interesting one. So this is the Asian Openbill, or Asian Openbill stork. So these guys are a large wading bird in the stork family. They are quite distinctive and only found mainly in the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia. They are greyish or white with the glossy black wings, and the tails adults have a gap with the arched upper mandible and a reduced lower mandible. So they've got like a very interesting bill, you can see, because it looks open. That's where they kind of get the name from. Young birds are actually born without this gape, and which is thought to be an adaptation to eating snails, which is their main prey. And although resident within their range, they will make long-distance movements to find food, and depending on the weather too. So they were first described by French polymath Georges Louis Lerc Comte de Waffen in 1780, with specimens collected, and also pallets were collected as well. Their scientific name is Anastomus ochlorus. So the name means kind of to furnish with your mouth, and ochlorus for yawning. So it's the to furnish with your mouth, and yawning is kind of where their name comes from, or reference to their weird mouth, which is quite interesting. So you can see in terms of description, you can see they're predominantly greyish in non-breeding season colours, or in the breeding season they will be a little bit more white in colour, with glossy black wings and a tail with a green or purple sheen. The name, as I mentioned, is also derived from that kind of hole in their beak, because their mandible is downturned and goes up, while their top beak is straight, which is very interesting. The young birds do not have this gap, as I mentioned before, and the cutting edge of this mandible is actually used like a fine brush-like structure that's sought to get to a better grip of the shells of snails. And the tail consists of 12 feathers, and the preen gland has a tuft. The mantle is black, and the bill is horn grey. At a distance, they can be confused with white stork or oriental storks, which is kind of at the distance, but if you look at their beak, they're very clearly different. Their legs are short legs, which is actually quite short for a stork, are pinkish or to grey, reddish prior to breeding, and non-breeding breeding birds have a smoky grey wing and black instead of white, and young birds are brownish grey and have a brownish mantle, and like other stork species, they are a broad-winged soaring bird that relies mostly on thermals or hot air for sustained flight. and they usually are found in flocks, but single birds also not uncommon. And like all storks, they fly with their neck outstretched, and they're relatively small for a stork and can stand to about 68 centimeters in height, or about 81 centimeters long. So they're quite small for a stork. A lot of storks get a meter plus. So in terms of their distribution, the usual typical hunting habitats or foraging habitats are in the inland wetlands and are only really seen along riverbanks or tidal flows. On agricultural landscapes, they forage in crop fields, seasonal marshes, and irrigation channels. They move widely in response to habitat changes, with young birds dispersing widely after fledging, with individuals ringed in Bharatpur in India actually being found 800 kilometers east, and a bird that was actually ringed in Thailand was also found in Bangladesh, which is 1,500 kilometers west. So that's quite cool. They're also regularly disoriented by lighthouses along the shore of southeast coast of India and overcast nights between August and September. They're also very rare in Punjab and Sindh regions of Pakistan, but widespread in India. They've also been found in Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, and have recently actually extended their range into southwestern China, which is quite cool. And they seem to actually be able to be susceptible to drying during hailstorms. And in South China, actually, 45 Asian openbills were collected dead after a hailstorm, but the carcasses of other bird species were not seen. So for whatever reason, they're quite susceptible to that. In terms of their forage and feeding, during the warmer parts of the day, they will soar on the thermals and have a habit of descending rapidly into their feeding areas. Groups will feed and forage together close proximity to shallow water or marshy grounds, where they may walk with a slow and steady gait. They particularly like to feed on large mollusks, especially snail species, and they actually separate the shell from the body using the tip of their beak. So the tip of the lower mandible is often twisted to the right, as you can kind of see there. You probably notice it there, often twisted to the right. And this tip is injected into the opening of the snail. Oh, where's that from? Into the opening of the snail, as we mentioned. And the exact action is difficult to see, and they actually extract the bill straight from underwater, so it's quite difficult to see. And they've noted they've even able to capture snails while blindfolded, and the exact action is quite difficult to see, which has led to considerable speculation. They examined the evidence of specimens and literature came to the conclusion that the bill gap was used like a nutcracker, and he held the rough edges of the bill into being a result to wear and tear of such actions. And subsequent studies have dismissed the idea, and the round edges of the bill has been suggested to use adaptation to handle slippery or hard prey. And they forage for prey by holding their bill tips slightly apart and making rapid vertical jabs at shallow water, often with their head and neck partly submerged. The gap in the bill is not used for holding small shells and forms only with age. Young birds, as we mentioned, lack this gap, but are still able to forage for snails. This actually suggests that the gap allows a tip to strike at a greater angle and increases the force that can apply on snail species, with snail pieces often swallowed whole or crushed. In one occasion, they actually discarded male testes and female abdomen guns of Bushman calcata, and they also fed on water snakes, frogs, and large insects. And when foraging in agricultural lands, they'll actually prefer to use like natural marshes and lakes and irrigation channels as foraging habitat, which is also quite cool. Well, that's not what we wanted to do. That's a bit of a tease for the future. Anyway, we'll have a look at another one. I think the baby's got a bit of a bug because it's like completely white. But anyway, we'll get into breeding. So in terms of breeding, the breeding season is after the rain, so it's during September in northern India, July to September in northern India and Nepal, and November to March in southern India and Sri Lanka. So the main script breeding in drought years. They breed colonially, so they'll build a rough platform out of sticks and half submerged trees, and typically lay about 3 to 4 eggs. And they will nest with other species such as egrets, cormorants, and darters, but there can be single species colonies like in lowland Nepal. Nesting colonies are sometimes in highly disturbed areas such as in villages or trees located in crop fields. And they've also been found in small cities, with 13 colonies and agricultural land having an average size of 52. So it's probably just because it's a little bit safer. And they do have some trees, like the bowbacks, cinnabar trees, where they prefer, and then it also just depends. And religious beliefs also have secured important trees, such as the Fiscus species, and like that, they seem to prefer those trees, which is quite interesting. Initiation of nests in lowland Nepal is highly synchronized, so they start around July and August, and breeding success in nests of the colonies is impacted by the proximity of habitat to human habitation and the progression of the breeding season. So colonies closer to human habitation tend to have lower success, with colonies initially initiated later during the breeding season, when flooding of the rice fields is reduced to allow to ripen the crop, has lower success. And the number of chicks that fledged from colonies located in agricultural landscapes along Nepal were similar to those observed and protected. So this actually was not determined by larger water birds, so that's quite cool. Nesting openbills in Nepal took an average about 27 minutes to return to their nests for nestlings, food and nestlings. And the time it takes to find food was mostly impacted by the location of where they found. Adults will take less time to return with food earlier with the season, when dominant rice crops are most flooded, and the time it takes for the rice to ripen as well. And they tend to feed them lots of snails. And hatchlings will get about 87 to 120 grams of food a day, with older ones getting between 272 and 386 grams of food a day. And like other storks, they are silent except for the chattering produced by the male's bill against the females during copulation. They also will produce loud honking noises, accompanied by up and down movements when meeting a partner. And males are sometimes form polygynous associations with two females, which lay their eggs in the same nest, so he'll obviously take care of them all, which is a little bit cute, I would say. So in terms of relationship with other organisms, young birds will sometimes be preyed upon by imperial steppe or greater spotted eagles. And there's also intestinal parasite called Carnocephalus ferox, which can be found in the 80% of the wild population in Thailand. Or the other Hyena parasites can be found in these guys, and also ticks. And then in India, they're actually sportsmen will shoot them for meat, and calling them the beefsteak bird, although the name was originally used for the woolly-necked stork. So yeah, very interesting species, and a bit of interesting history to go with it, if I do say so myself. See, I don't know where I just got this on my thing. I don't know where that came from. Hope it's nothing important. I'll have a look after this video. Anyway, let's carry on. So next up, we're moving to some extinct animals. How can you not love that? So next up, we got Granastrapotherium, which is a very cool Granastrapotherium. Really, really cool animal. So this is an animal that not a lot of people have heard of, but it's nice to see it getting some love. So we'll actually have a look and talk about it. So Granastrapotherium is a genus of ungulate mammal described from the remains of the rocks of the Hodor Formation in the Talcata Desert in the Colombian departments of Huila and Tamal in the Miocene fossil sites of La Venta. So the only formal species recognized of this genus is Granastrapotherium snorki, which means kind of great lightning beast, which is in Strapotherium means lightning beast, and snorkel breathing tube in refers to its trunk. And remains of Bolivia seem to belong to a species or a very similar animal, so they seem to have a little bit of a wider range. So this Anstrapothere differs from its co-evils, ones like the Granastrapotherium, due to its larger size. So these guys got quite big, to about 3 to 4 tons, with tusks that are about 1 meter long, making it one of the largest representatives of the group Anstrapotheria, which we'll get to, only surpassed by some species of Parastrapotherium. Other differences include the one premolar, the lack of incisors in the jaw and the canine teeth, and very large horizontal, which actually resembles much less like those of hippos and much more like those of ancient elephants, although the defenses of elephants and their relatives are not formed by canines, but their incisors. And similarly, the large nostrils are also extremely withdrawn in the skull, suggesting they had a large trunk, very much like other Anstrapothere species, or Astropotheres. And most like elephants, they would have used this proboscis to help cut leaves and things like that. So kind of like an elephant, but not, because there were no elephants in Miocene South America, so they potentially kind of took that niche or evolutionary kind of way to do it. But I have to explain what an Anstrapothere is. I feel like I should have done that first, but we'll talk about Anstrapotheres, and this is kind of one of their best examples. So there's the extinct order of South American and Antarctic hoofed mammals that lived from the late Paleocene to the Miocene from about 59 to 11 million years ago. And they were quite large and rhinoceros-like animals, but they were some of the most bizarre animals. And though relationships are not that clear, they seem to be related to Melounungata, which includes nodoungulates, Lipotheria, or groups of very weird South American ungulates that are not alive today. They actually just missed that. Though DNA evidence suggests that these guys may be close to their closest living relatives may be perissodactyls, such as tapirs, horses, and rhinos. And quite a big group. There's lots of different species, actually. So what really makes it weird is got the ever-growing teeth, very, very large teeth. They seem to be very similar to rhinos in a lot of ways, and it's a great example of convergent evolution. And there's different families. And the most famous member is Granastrapotherium, which is like the smaller version of this. It had a long elephant-like trunk, and it lost its upper incisors and developed ever-growing canine tusks. And they've also lost their premolar. And there's other relatives that lacked proboscis and other species. There's quite a variety in this group. So yeah, very, very cool animals. So nice to talk about these guys. And then Strapothere is an animal that Astropotheres don't get a lot of love. So it's really nice that we get to see an animal like that. And it's really, really cool. And South America's diversity during the Cenozoic, because it was isolated until the Pliocene, the Great American Biotic Interchange, is very often forgotten, because there was a lot of really interesting animals that lived during that time from the Paleogene to the Miocene and Pliocene, and lots of really interesting groups of endemic South American mammals evolved there, and a lot of them get forgotten. Other things like Selachus milos and Macrocenia and Toxodon, which are the more famous examples, but there's a whole bunch of really, really cool, obviously ground sloths as well, but a lot of really, really cool ancient groups of prehistoric mammals that are kind of forgotten in the from South America during that time, during the Cenozoic. But yeah, anyway, really, really cool. We're going to move on to the next one. So next up we have got another one. We've got Pachycocata. So the giant short-faced hyena is the other name. So these guys are an extinct genus of prehistoric hyena, with the largest and most researched species being the one here, which is Pachycocata bivarostris, which is commonly known as the giant short-faced hyena. And it stood to about 90 to 100 centimeters, or about 35 to 39 inches at the shoulder, and it was estimated to weigh about 110 kilograms or 240 pounds, approaching the size of a lioness, which made it the largest known hyena. So these guys first appeared in the late Miocene, between 7 to 5 million years ago, but by 800,000 years ago it became locally extinct in Europe, and it survived into East Asia until about 500,000 years ago, and possibly later in other parts of Asia. So the first kind of identified fossils of the short-faced hyena was discovered in France in 1845 by French paleontologist Auguste Amade, and then there's been other species, and they were just considered a species of hyena, but then were kind of lumped into... They were usually regarded as type of hyena, which is the same genus as the modern striped and bound hyena. And then in 1928, Hungarian paleontologist Milos Krzyzewski erected the new genus Pachycocata, and then they likely places ancestral to Cocata, which is the modern species of striped hyena, that's the most famous one. So dozens more short-faced hyena remains have been found since then, and a few different species have been described. The main species now is Pachycocata bivarostris, but there's a few other species like Parabonita, which is now called Parahyena. So it's kind of being taxonomy, it's one of those things. And usually there is no more than one or two Asian short-faced hyena species considered distinct from this one. So in 2021 there was actually recorded a large one from China, which was the largest one, and there's different subspecies. But subspecies with extinct species is silly. So it's a taxonomy being taxonomy. It's about it. The taxonomic position at the moment is debated, but most recent research suggests that they may be closely related to Pachycocata, so they were originally considered to be related to spotted hyenas, but actually there's another more recent study that suggests they were related to brown hyenas, along with the extinct Pliocutata and other species. So the taxonomy a little bit is debated, of course, taxonomy being taxonomy, but it's really important because we need to know where they fit in the tree so we can understand their modern relatives. But yeah, so it's very likely they could be related to either. This is obviously going off the more spotted hyena interpretation. There's something more like a brown hyena could be obviously very likely too. So as I mentioned, they are quite big. The largest of all hyenas, about 100 centimeters tall at the shoulder, and about 100 kilograms, or some individuals may have reached about 150 kilograms. Their limb bones were massive, but while these bones were relatively short, so they actually suggested were quite good at breaking apart carcasses. And the teeth, particularly the large premolars, were powerfully built and had strong adaptations for breaking bone, like modern spotted hyenas or normal hyenas. Very interesting, there is a cache of very comprehensive bone material found in the Zhirkov cave in northern China that probably resembles animals using these caves as their lairs for many millennia. And in the western east of their former range, the southwestern Spain, there's huge amounts of Pleistocene evidence that suggests their den. So yet another example in Pakistan, there's animals believed to be scavenged and killed by para hyena were accumulated, and seems to be in terms of its behavior based on these fossils, it's suggested by the modern striped hyena, they would have been kleptoparasitic scavengers that killed the kills of other prey, such as saber-toothed cats and maybe bears and things like that. They would have also scavenged food too, and being a heavy-set animal, were not really built for chasing over long distances. In respect, they would have been different than the spotted hyena of today, which is more nimble. So they probably would have been a little bit more like brown or striped hyenas in terms of their ecology. And nimbles, a spotted hyena today is more nimble and is even usually actually kills its own food. It is believed to be most ecologically close enough to the smaller but still large relative of the Pliocutata, which has never been found in fossils of the same region. And there's actually found remains of Homo erectus alongside Pachycocata as well, and they have puncture patterns observed on hominin long bones, which were originally thought were to be signs of cannibalism to predation by this species. So these guys ate our early relatives. They also likely competed with early relatives of Homo falcarian, and actually others have argued they would have likely been able to hunt medium-large prey in packs similar to living spotted hyenas, which is true. It's very likely. They probably would have specialized being more megafaunal. They probably just hunted animals that weren't quite as fast, specializing on bigger prey as well. In terms of their extinction and evolution, the oldest fossils have come from the Pliocene of East Africa, with the species Balax from the early Pleistocene of South America. I mean, morphologically similar to P. variegis, so its geographical situation is vicinity. It also proposed that the species would have likely evolved into Pliococata pirini, which are only distinguishable by a small difference. The earliest fossils of these guys date to about 1.8 to 2 million years ago in Europe, while the earliest in East Asia are actually slightly older. They also went to extinct in Europe about 800,000 years ago with the arrival of spotted hyenas, or the cave hyena, during that about 800,000 years ago, which some authors suggest they may have outcompeted them, though there is no evidence of temporal overlap between the two species. They may have just gone extinct for another reason, and the spotted hyena kind of came and took that niche, though, correlation does not equal causation kind of thing. The extinction of the saber-toothed cat Meganterion may have actually suggested to be a factor, since they may have scavenged on their food. And they became extinct in Europe as part of a major faunal turnover during the early to middle Pleistocene, with the transition with many megafaunal species in Europe becoming extinct, likely to the more unstable climate of the changes in the length of glacial cycles. And the last remains of East Asia date to about 500,000 years ago, though they may have lasted a little longer in other parts of Asia. So yeah, really, really cool species. How can you not love these guys? Another one done by Leaf. So these three species that we're going to go into next are all done by Nicholas Lionrider and Leaf, who did a great job with that. Nicholas Lionrider has really come back into the scene and really given us some awesome mods. But last but certainly not least, we have got everyone's kind of favorite short-faced bear. We've got Arctodus simus. So this is a really, really cool animal. So let's have a look at these guys. So Arctodus is the extinct genus of short-faced bear that lived in North America during the Pleistocene, so about 2.5 million years ago until about 12,000 years ago. There are two recognized species: the lesser short-faced bear and the giant short-faced bear. Arctodus priscus, and the giant short-faced bear was Simus. But because this one is Simus, we are going to just talk about Simus. I may mention the other one occasionally, but I am going to focus more on this one because I don't want that to be too long, because this is actually quite a lot of information. So, of these species, Simus is larger and is more well known. And Priscus was largely found in the early Pleistocene of the eastern United States, while Simus was actually found pretty much across all of the US, from like the United States, Mexico, and Canada. So it's likely the smaller species then got bigger and kind of evolved. And though both species are relatively rare in the fossil record. So taxonomy. So they were first described by Joseph Liddy in 1854 with a Priscus in the Ashley phosphate bed in South Carolina. And Arctodus means bear tooth, which is kind of funny. And they originally considered Arctotherium, Simus, but then were all grouped into the species. The 19th century specimens are occasionally referred to Arctotherium. However, today they're actually considered to be Arcto. And there was a couple of other species described, like Wingerai, which is kind of lumped into the two. And Arctodus should not be mistaken with the Eurasian cave bear. They're very different animals. And fossils of the species have been found with the partly contemporary short-faced bear Tremarctos floriensis, and they are highly crowned and larger teeth compared to their relatives, which have larger molars and often worn too. So these guys may have been a bit different. And actually, their closest living relative, as we get to, they belong to the family, Arctodus belongs to the family of Tremarctidae, which is the short-faced bears, and their only living relative today is the South American spectacled bear. So, spectacled bear. I think we've covered them in here before, Tremarctos. Yeah, the South American spectacled bear is their only living relative, which is kind of funny because they're quite small for bears and mostly herbivorous. Well, these guys would have had a very different ecology, as we'll get into. So, Arctodus would have likely spread from these guys about 5 million years ago in the Miocene-Pliocene boundary, where the Tremarctic bears would have actually expressed an explosive radiation diversity, and veg grasses and open habitats kind of evolved. And the world also experienced great temperature drop and also increased seasonality as well. So as I mentioned, the first species, Arctodus priscus, was found only in eastern North America, and some have even been found in Florida. And then kind of Arctodus simus kind of was most plentiful in western North America, found in mixed woodlands and open habitats, though eventually it migrated east and spread across all of North America until about the middle, for about 500,000 years. And they would have co-inhabited in the middle Pleistocene. They would have lived together, though eventually Primus might have gone extinct and potentially Simus could have taken over its range. And the kind of last finds is when it became extinct. However, there actually are Simus became a pan-continental species in the late Pleistocene, ensuring that distribution with the black bear. And despite that range, it's actually comparatively rare. They would have been widespread but uncommon in your ecosystems. So Arctodus priscus would have been about the same size as a grizzly bear, an overlapping size with the kind of Florida short-faced bear. And they would have been calculated to be 140 kilograms, with some larger ones being up to 400 kilograms. While Arctodus simus would have been one of the largest land-dwelling members of carnivora to ever live in North America. It would have stood about 2.4 to 3.4 meters, or 8 to 11 feet, with a maximum vertical arm reach of about 14 feet or 4.3 meters. And while walking on all fours, it would have been between 1 to 1.67, or about 3'3" to 5'5" in height at the shoulder, with the largest males actually being able to be about 6 foot tall, looking an adult man in the eye. The average weight of the simus, or the greater short-faced bear, I'll just refer to them as greater short-faced bear and lesser short-faced bear from now on. It was about 625 kilograms, or 1,378 pounds, with a maximum recorded of being about 957, or 2,110 pounds, or just under a ton. So very big animals. And there have been studies looking into that, finding these, based on, finding estimates, things like that. and that's kind of the ones everyone's kind of landed on. And there is evidence of sexual dimorphism, so there is much variation in adult size among specimens, and a lack of fine sexual dimorphism, individuation, and potentially ectomorphs could be augmenting the average size of both species of Arctodus. And size differences have been noted in Simus, suggesting there may have been a northern and central and southern subspecies, though that's kind of, being, as I mentioned before, a bit weird. However, the discovery of a very large southern Simus, which was actually found in Florida and New Mexico, and some in La Brea, actually kind of got rid of that. So it's likely they just would have been pretty much the same size all across their range. And for example, only one baculum has actually been recovered from over 100 giant short-faced bear sites in North America, and also that baculum, or penis bone, would have actually belonged to a black bear. So it's very hard to tell sizes apart. But looking at their modern relatives, sexual dimorphism within male spectacle bears, typically male spectacle bears are 30 to 40% larger than the females. So very likely, based on that, these large individual specimens may have been large older males, while the smaller ones would have been females. So that's very interesting. So there is, based on that, there is likely evidence for sexual dimorphism, and you can see how huge these guys are. So that's the male. You can see how huge these guys are, absolutely gigantic. So going into the anatomy, they're not only different, the two species are not only different in size, but also by the shorter snout, greater prognatha, more robust teeth, and longer limbs. So Pristis is actually distinguished by having smaller, narrower, and less crowded teeth. However, their body is the same genera, so they're actually quite similar. And actually, Simus, or the greater short-faced bear, actually resembles living hyenids in skull shape. So you can kind of see they've got the very short skull, potentially well adapted for bone crushing. And in general, the species of the Pteromarctine subfamily of bears have short skulls compared to most modern bears, where they get the name short-faced, and they would have actually argued to exhibit a wide and shortened rostrum, giving them a little bit more of a felid-like appearance. And they had quite a broad snout and a highly developed olfactory apparatus, along with a larger throat to potentially eat larger amounts of food. However, this is actually suggested to cause deep snouts compared to Pteromarctine bears. They also have deeper but not shorter faces than most living bears, and the characteristics are shared by the only living spectacled bear. The orbits as well are proportionally small compared to the size of the body, which is characteristic of spectacled bears. More so than actively kind of receiving brown bears, which have suggesting that stereoscopic vision was not a priority. And they have a large sagittal crest, so they likely had quite powerful jaws. And morphologically, they have matched the characteristics actually common in herbivorous bears, so like pandas and spectacled bears. This indicates they had large blunt areas and large mandibular teeth, which is actually rare in carnivorous mammals. And a herbivorous carnivorans such as Arctodus lack the gut microbiota to eat a lot of plants. They would have had big teeth to basically grind that down for them, which is interesting. And there has been evidence trying to see whether they were more herbivorous or carnivorous. But looking at their teeth, they suggest this is kind of more of an omnivorous bear, potentially. In terms of their dentition as well, the premolars and first molars of the lesser short-faced bear is relatively smaller and more widely spaced. And these guys actually had a trend to reinforce tooth enamel, and they seem to have convergently evolved this in giant pandas, Granastrapotherium bears, and Hemiscion. And the dentition is used as evidence for an Simus, or the greater short-faced bear, is evidence of a predatory lifestyle with large canines, penile carnassials, crowned lower first molar and upper fourth premolar, which have been relatively flat. Dentition can be a poor indicator of size, as is trying to estimate individuals, because, teeth sometimes vary a bit. But we'll carry on. In terms of the postcranial morphology, what's very interesting about the short-faced bear, they do have quite long legs. They actually, a study concluded they weren't proportionally longer than modern bears than expected to, and that bears are generally long-lived. And it's kind of the reason they kind of look like they have those longer legs is because they do have relatively shorter back and torsos compared to other bears. And that kind of makes them just look kind of weird. However, other researchers argue that these bones actually would have had a more gracile, longer-legged appearance. And although longer, they still overlap with Ursus in terms of their kind of proportions. And their limb bones are stouter than those of large-bodied feelers. And rather than running, these guys may have actually had longer legs, stiff legging, swifter gait, very similar to polar bears, which allow them to move long distances. So because polar bears are considered the widest ranging mammal in the world, or land mammal in the world. They have adaptations to allow them to walk long distances, and it seems that the greater short-faced bear actually shared a lot of those adaptations, so it would allow them to wander large distances, which makes sense because of their wide range. In some research, also suggests that these long limbs would have allowed to increase vision over ground cover, and also been used for tearing and pulling down on vegetation. And there's been research also disagree with the interpretation of the humerus. Some suggest, this would have been quite good for pinning down animals and pulling them down with their claws. They actually seem to be in the early stages as well of becoming cursorials. They would have been more efficient and for high-speed, low intimation. And they would have actually potentially been more adept at hunting prey or catching prey or chasing after prey compared to polar or brown bears. Though on the other hand, they suggest that they would have been powerful. They still would have been quite powerful to grab large prey. So we'll talk about a little bit into that as we get into it. And they would have actually suggest there have been lots of characteristics of diggers in polar bears, so they would actually potentially have been digging for ground squirrels and roots and tubers. And their elbow jerks suggest they also have higher degree of forelimb dexterability, which would have a little bit more arboreal, with wrist and foraging and vegetation, which is quite interesting. In terms of their paws, they actually long, slender paws, and more elongated than Ursine bears, which also allows for the evidence, of them being more potentially walking around, things like that. However, this is contradicted by other evidence that they would have had splayed toes, or could be different species, things like that. There's actually the presence as well as a partial thumb, which is a characteristic that's a false thumb, similar to what not koalas, but panda bears have, so there potentially could be that. It'd be an ancestral trait, which is interesting. In paleopathology, there has been evidence of them having syphilis and things like that, and injuries, and injured toes, which is quite interesting. But now we'll get into more about their paleobiology. So most kind of proposed this locomotion. They would have had a highly efficient gait, which was like a moderate pacing gait, which is more specialized than bears. So the research considered that this larger body size, high shoulders, and short and sloping back would have allowed them to be more efficient, and they would have made them built for endurance. So they would have been able to pretty much walk long distances quite efficiently, like camels or polar bears. And they would have had a top speed of 40 to 45 kilometers per hour, and would shift into like a pace about 8.5 kilometers per hour, and could gallop about 18 kilometers an hour. So that shows they would have been able to move at quite a good speed. Other things as well, maturity. They actually looked at with the specimens. Comparison to black bears suggests that these guys were either 4 to 6 years of age of female, or 6 to 8 of male. And additionally, the wear patterns suggest they would have adulthood would have been about 4 to 8 years between male and female. So 4 to 6 years if you are a female, and 6 to 8 years if you're a male bear. So that's kind of how it goes. In terms of genetic diversity as well, they've been looking at mitochondrial DNA, so preserved DNA in like the Yukon, things like that. They just there were different halotypes. And genetic diversity was actually compared to modern endangered faunas, such as the brown kiwi or African cheetah, with a genetic bottleneck happening about 44,000 years ago that led into low diversity, being a feature of the species, which is primarily social, with a large home range, small population size. And though it doesn't entirely preclude genetic diversity, it potentially could have been other populations would have been more diverse. Maybe this population may just been a little bit more, isolated than others. In terms of its diet, there's been actually a lot of debate. We'll have a look at the female. There's been a lot of debate on how herbivorous or carnivorous these guys would have been. So the fact that Arctodus's dentition did not differ much from modern bears suggests that these guys were omnivorous, much like modern bears. So they do have, as we mentioned, adaptations which confirm that these guys, like spectacled bears, would have eaten a lot of vegetation. And this is averred by dental damage, lack of dental damage as well for the carnivore, things like that. Though there is other evidence suggests, as we mentioned, the omnivorous diet for the bear and the false thumb would have assisted in eating vegetation, potentially would have helped with that. Along with the larger body size being a little bit more restrictive, base of being carnivorous. And while the features of that suggest herbivory, their close relation to the spectacled bear suggests that may have been ancestral. And a browsing diet, foraging for the canopies and trees would have been difficult with the bodies of bears, so they would have likely been a little bit more omnivorous than their relatives. And the diet of individuals, La Brea was suggested to be based on like tooth wear and things like that, more similar to those of spectacled bears, which consume leafy matter and fruits and greens and the occasional protein. And remember, these spectacled bears can still hunt a lot, so they would have been good predators. And they have less generalized diet than the modern omniherbivorous black bears, which none of them is evidence of carcasses or nuts found in polar bears, black bears, or hyenas. In comparisons, a dental Maiwa to Ernest Splayus, so that's the cave bear, suggests difference, dietary differences between the two species, with cave bears eating tougher vegetation than the species. And there's also a lot of evidence that suggests that these guys could have eaten meat as well, and may have been a bit more active predators compared to spectacled bears. There's evidence that isotopes suggest that they would have eaten a lot of food, a lot of meat, and eating potentially like larger species browsers or browse vegetation was part of their diet. Another thing is gracility, so they would have contemplated predation of adult herbivores and hindered to chasing their nimbler prey. And nevertheless, the larger ones would have been more carnivorous than females, with very large brown bears not being able to just sustain themselves on a vegetarian diet. So likely larger bears would have been more carnivorous just because they can't just eat plants all day. And furthermore, the much larger frame of these guys would have proven an advantage. So they wouldn't even, maybe potentially not even to hunt that often, just being so big they would have been able to scare most predators off their carcasses. But studies have also established they would have had varied diets without their range, and were outcompeted and or more herbivorous and in increased competition with other predators. So the extinction of Borophagus and Huracan would have opened that niche for Simus. But also as well, bone damage is also as well. There are bite marks on bones of ground sloths and young proboscideans that match the teeth of lesser short-faced bears. And also there's been found an association with mammoths and things like that. They likely would have been scavenging on them as well. And even there as the canines of Panthera atrox overlap in size, so it could have been just a large bear. But as damaged bones, actually Alaska suggests they would have taken them to dens and kind of chewed on them by the time where lions would have overlapped. So they would have likely had a lot of overlap with American lions in terms of the prey they were eating. In Beringia, analysis of the bones suggests that in Beringia they were eating a lot. So even in North America they may be more generalized, because in Beringia they would have had to compete with things like steppe brown bears and brown bears. They would have actually kind of niche partitioned, with brown bears becoming a little bit more herbivorous, while these guys would have been a much more carnivorous to compensate. So they would have allowed them to live together. So that kind of complicates the story as well. So in North America generally they would have been more omnivorous, so feeding a bit on both, but because they had to compete with brown bears in Beringia, they would have become more carnivorous to compensate, while Alaskan brown bears would have become more herbivorous. So it's very interesting to think, like, even because you always say, oh, is it a carnivore herbivore? But even in different areas they would have been eating different foods, and that makes it just infinitely more complicated. But yeah, isotope studies looking at the greater short-faced bear, isotope studies that show what they've been eating, they look at the most kind of generally, they kind of see that there were isotopes cannot distinguish between hypercarnivores and omnivores, which eat a significant amount of plant matter. So they were likely eating a lot of meat, but it was just not enough to tell if they were carnivorous or omnivores. So looking at them, they look like they would have been eating a lot of meat, and even during the kind of the late Pleistocene, they would have eaten higher trophic level. They would have been eating a lot of meat. But in terms of their hibernation, though, these guys have been found in Port Kennedy with individuals kind of in potentially hibernating. And there's claw marks from short-faced bears, and the most abundant bears that would have been denning and often have been preserved, with both Pleistocene and modern American brown bears kind of hiding in caves and hibernating in there, which is quite interesting. But as I mentioned before, in terms of their ecology, the less short-faced bear was only found in West North America, while Simus was found pretty much all across the US, and down into Mexico, up into Alaska, and even Beringia. And often, as I mentioned, they would have been referred to as the bulldog bear. They would have been quite widely spread. They would have been a colossal opportunistic herbivore with a diet very similar to the bear. They would have been scavenging also on carcasses and hunting prey as well, and eating a large amount of vegetation, so doing a bit of both. So they would have ranged pretty much most of the place, and then kind of feeding on all sorts of things and defending their prey from like lions and things like that. And there's, yeah, I'm not going to go too much in detail, but that's kind of where they all would have lived, with a lot of that kind of megafauna as well, and they even managed to make it to Beringia, which was almost like considered ecologically separate, but they did, which being like the treeless mammoth steppe, but they would have been used to all sorts of different habitats around North America, from like the highlands and the inner plains and the plateaus and the mountains, so they would have had a wide variety of habitats, but Beringia was a little bit separate, and since they also had to compete with brown bears, they did become more carnivorous, and they would have likely been able to scavenge more because of animals like Homotherium and wolves there as well, cave lions and muskox and Beringian wolves they would have been able to scavenge from. But yeah, interesting with their relationship with other bears too. We already kind of mentioned that. And they likely would have convergently evolved with other species such as Arctotherium and had those short skulls to be able to become a bit more herbivorous, things like that. They're also believed to have actually lived on Vancouver Island as well, so there would have been niche partitioning where they preferred meat and brown bears preferred plants in comparison. So that's quite cool. And in terms of interaction with humans, there have been documented evidence of butchery of these guys hunting bears and using foot bones and using their bones. And there's actually suggested that these guys may have actually kind of made a barrier to humans migrating into North America, because it's a huge bear that would probably eat them, so that could have been a huge barrier for them, but it was never really accepted by paleontologists. And as we mentioned, they lived in Beringia, so they coexisted there until about 23,000 years ago with humans and bears and things like that. But we'll also talk about their extinction. So the greater short-faced bear is the one we're talking about, so we'll talk about its extinction. So it likely went extinct with the other megafauna about 12,000 years ago, along with mammoths and mastodons, ground sloths, smilodon, all those animals. And there's been lots of talk about what it could have been. Climate change is potentially a big impact, because there would have a lot of places would have changed, like woodlands would have become more like spruce places, and the younger dryas, lots of climatic changes. But these guys were quite generalist in terms of their environment, so it's not likely they would have been impacted that much. Another thing is low genetic diversity. So because they were such wide-ranging animals with low populations, that potentially that low diversity would have allowed them to, would have reduced their ability to adapt to changing conditions, which means they became more susceptible to extinction. But also there's also humans, potentially killing off the megafauna and things like that. Yeah, it's just like most of the debates about it, it's just one of the animals that adds to the big debate of what killed the Pleistocene megafauna. Either things, like climate change, people, disease, or one of those big things. Yeah, there's been lots of research into this guy, especially into whether being hypercarnivores or how carnivorous they were, whether they were hypercarnivores or specialist kleptoparasites or omnivores. But pretty much we've landed at the moment that these guys were definitely carnivorous. They would have eaten a lot of meat, but they would have been more omnivorous. But in certain areas, such as Beringia, where they had to live with other species like brown bears, they would have become more carnivorous to compensate. But overall, they probably would have been pretty evenly, maybe a little bit more carnivorous or a little bit more herbivorous, depending on where they are. So definitely omnivorous. So that's where we've kind of landed at the moment, based on all the research on isotopes and everything. That's where it's kind of landed for the short-faced bear. But yeah, we'll have a look at the cute little babies. Let's have a look at the cute little guys. Love these little baby bears. But yeah, I think this is a great place to end the video. So I really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Before I do that, I'll say thank you to Nicholas Lineryder and Leaf for making these bear species, and all the other modders, Scott and Lorby, who made the Openbill, and Leaf and Nicholas Lineryder for making the Granastrapotherium, the short-faced hyena, and the short-faced bear. So yeah, thank you all for that. But yeah, I really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to get the little bell icon to make sure you get a notification when I upload anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.